thank you once again for joining us for this Big Green webinar. Many of you will know us at A Rocha UK, but if you've stumbled across this session, just to introduce, well, I'm going to introduce myself first. I'm the chair of A Rocha UK. My name is the Reverend Mike Perry. Before I did this, I was a research biologist. I've been working with churches in the Anglican Church in the Church of England for many years about caring for creation, and it's been my real privilege in the last couple of years to be the chair of trustees for A Rocha UK. Now, A Rocha UK is the only Christian conservation charity in the UK, and our calling from Scripture, we believe, is to help people care for creation. It's something we believe that every single Christian has got a vocation for, that we're all called to care for this wonderful world. And this afternoon, we're going to talk about A Rocha's Big Green Vision, what it is, how we are looking to achieve it, and how we're going to reach the goals that we've set ourselves. This is something actually we're really excited about, and we believe it's something God is calling us to, and importantly is calling us to partner with you as individuals and you as churches, as across the nations, as we gather to care for this wonderful world that God has given us. First of all, we'll hear from A Rocha UK CEO, Andy Atkins, who will give us an overview and an update of all the things that are happening around our work. We're then going to hear some stories from Helen Stevens, who leads our Eco Church programme, and then stories from Andy Lester too, who heads up our conservation work. There'll be an opportunity for questions after Andy Atkins has spoken, and then also after Helen and Andy Lester have spoken too. So that gives you some idea of what's going to be going on this afternoon. But again, let me just say thank you for joining us today and sharing with us this vision that we have of caring for this wonderful world that God has given. Around the country at the moment, around the world, there are many things that can feel quite depressing and discouraging, both in terms of where the world is headed and issues about climate change too. But we feel that actually engaging with this work, our calling, is something that can give hope, practical hope, both to us as individuals, but to the wider world as well. I know you can't see each other, but be encouraged that there are actually over 500 plus who have signed up for us today. And I know that many of you have been working in this whole area of caring for this wonderful world that God has given us for many, many years. And today represents the fact we are part of that large and growing community. And we know when participating in God's labour, it's never in vain. And together we can be partners in Christ to care for creation. So I'm going to hand you over now to Andy Atkins to start this webinar and to give us an update of the work that A Rocha UK is doing.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you to all of you for coming. It's strange not to be able to see your faces, but I recognise many of the names, so it's good to know you're out there. And for those who I haven't yet met, I really hope we will at some event of ours sooner or later. So for those of you who are less familiar with A Rocha UK, let me just explain a bit of the background to our current strategy, to our big green vision, the why, if you like, and then give a big picture view of what we're doing and how we're doing it, how it's going. So first slide, or next slide, please. What's behind A Rocha UK's work now? Well, at one level, it's the same as it's always been, a commitment by Christians to care for creation. But our approach has changed as we've had to face some quite hard facts about the pace of nature loss and of its impact on people. Now, one fact comes home to me regularly as I go out for a walk around the rather scrappy woodlands and fields near my home on the edge of London. And I imagine that some of you will recognize this same phenomenon. So on an average weekend, 45 years ago, I could have been found a rather kind of disheveled and morose teenager, as we all were at that stage of life, wandering around the damp fields and woodlands of Worcestershire, where my dad was a vicar, bird watching. And I would see vast flocks of farmland birds, of yellowhammers, greenfinches, linnets, lapwings. In our big vicarage garden, I could see lesser-spotted woodpeckers, flycatchers, willow tits. But where are they now? They've gone, haven't they? The abundance of wildlife in the UK has collapsed in my lifetime, and I hope I've still got many years to go. And we are indeed one of the most nature-poor countries on earth. So go back a few years, and A Rocha UK had a good reputation for local nature conservation work and education on why Christians should care for the environment. Yet it was increasingly obvious to the trustees and to the staff that biodiversity trends were going in absolutely the wrong direction, and that unless stopped, this would be catastrophic, not just for nature, but for people. That set us thinking. Next slide, please. So alongside that knowledge, it was also already clear that climate change was affecting millions of people each year, with more intense storms, extreme floods, droughts, then wildfires and fires and heat waves more recently. And these same weather extremes affect wildlife too. Frustratingly, governments were failing to lead, and our conclusion at that time was that it would now take whole sectors of society to act themselves, as well as pushing governments to act. All of that was really sobering when we were looking at this a few years back. But we felt there was hope, among other things, in the potentially game-changing role of Christians and churches if we could work together to address these existential threats. Because of our geographical coverage, for example, 50,000 churches in the UK, the numbers of people involved, our assets from buildings to land to financial investments, and our biblical mandate to act. So, next slide, please. We also gained hope and motivation, as always, from the Bible. We reflected on the biblical basis for action, such as this foundational passage in Genesis 2. The Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it. That critical last phrase that so often gets left out. We also reflected on passages such as the famous parable of the Good Samaritan in Luke, where Jesus is clear that we are to love our neighbor, anyone who is vulnerable and in need. And we had to face the fact that the environmental breakdown that we were seeing already is damaging people now. It is damaging our neighbor now, as well as stymieing the life chances of future generations. So even though A Rocha UK was very small, only about 10 staff at that point, about 8 years ago, we felt God challenging us to make a much bigger difference by being a catalyst for others to act, to help others, if you like, care for the garden, not just trying to do it all on our own in a few little corners of Britain. Next slide, please. So we changed our mission from one where all the progress was dependent on our small and volunteer team, however committed and hardworking we were, and to one with a new mission of equipping Christians and churches to care for the environment, for God, for nature, and for all people. And that's really what we've been trying to do ever since. The first step was to bring in programs and tools to help others, such as Eco Church, that many of you will know, Partners in Action scheme for Christian land managers, the Wild Christian scheme to support individuals and families. And the early results were really encouraging, and we were really, really indebted, and I want to say this, to organizations like Tear Fund, Christian Aid, actually the Methodist Church, who were early backers of Eco Church, without which we couldn't have done what has happened since. Then 3 years ago, we felt led to set out a vision for what change we would like to see in the next 5 years after that early experience of trying to be a catalyst. We knew that we couldn't achieve this, even less, on our own. We could only achieve it through collaboration with others. And that's what we have called our big green vision. Next slide, please. Well, this is pretty bold, and I'll tell you how it's going, warts and all, in a minute. But what we set out to do 3 years ago was to try to see 25% of churches in England and Wales, and in collaboration with others in Scotland, in Ireland, perhaps a similar number there, but that's their work, not ours. That's all about collaboration. 25,000 acres of land being managed by Christian land managers for nature in our Partner in Action scheme. 25,000 individuals acting regularly through us, 10,000 of those through the Wild Christian program. And we want to be able to support 5,000 Christian environmental leaders doing what they're doing, influencing in their spheres of influence. So how's it gone since then? In short, we've seen levels of engagement that we can barely keep up with, and I'll come back to that, though there's still a long way to go. So let me just focus on 3 programs now to tell you how they're going. Next slide, please. So we are now up to 6,758 eco-churches. And a key thing to note is that all major denominations are backing eco-church in England and Wales. We've recently received a grant from the Church of England, for which we're immensely grateful. That is enabling us to step up our work here. And there's also big interest from other A Rochas in other parts of the world to take this on. So it's beginning to have an international influence. Next slide, please. Then on the Partner in Action scheme, we have gone from 8 partners a few years ago to now 49 partners with over 7,000 acres of land being managed for nature and cutting carbon. This is a unique scheme, making a unique contribution in the world of the environment and conservation in the UK. It's the only one of its kind where we are working very collaboratively to turn land to an asset for nature without ourselves having to own that land. Then next slide, please. We have 7,000 people signed up to the Wild Christian program. I suspect many of you as well, which is a regular way of finding out things you can do, working together, campaigning for the environment. So a heartfelt thank you to all of you who've been part of that. Now I'm going to have to speed up here, but I'll go to the next slide just to briefly touch on some challenges and opportunities. We'll all be aware of the cost of living surge and the impact of that on individuals, families, and churches as well, which face multiple demands. At the same time, we're really aware of some big opportunities, higher public awareness of climate and biodiversity crisis, the fact that all of the major denominations have committed to getting to net zero carbon by 2030, a huge thing we wouldn't have imagined only a few years ago. And that climate and biodiversity action are mutually beneficial, by which we mean, for example, restoring habitats like wetland and grassland, woodlands is excellent for nature, of course, but it also absorbs carbon. So working on nature and climate together makes total sense in this crisis. How are we responding to this? Next slide, please. We just go back one because I'll have to talk to this one. A slide has gone west. We're trying to do a number of things to reap these opportunities and navigate these challenges. I think the first is to get the word out to as many churches and individuals as we can, that we can support them in doing this. This is what we're here for. We're trying to provide a service. The second thing is to advocate and to demonstrate that care for the environment supports the whole mission of the church. It's right that we care for the environment. It's the 5th mark of mission in the Anglican Church. But there are rich intersections between caring for the environment and social justice and economic justice. So engaging people in nature also points them towards a loving creator God, or creating more green space that people can access their well-being obviously serves the poor and the vulnerable, all of us, when we're feeling vulnerable. We want to collaborate with other organisations even more. We're thinking of Eco Congregation in Scotland, doing brilliant work up there. Eco Congregation Ireland, CAFOD, that run the Live Simply scheme for the Catholic Church. We're regularly talking to each other now, exchanging data and analysis and learning from each other, as everyone has something to contribute as we seek together to move the churches forward in these islands. And we're seeking some more support to fund just a small extra bit of capacity in the year ahead to really go faster in reaping these opportunities. So that's just some of the ways we're responding. If I go to the last slide now, please. How can we do this together? Many of you are already very engaged with us, and we're really grateful to that. But we want to resource you. So if you're not already signed up to one of our regular bulletins, whereby we can give you information to help you, we would suggest you sign up to our monthly e-news. From there, you can get into all the other programs very easily if you want to deepen your engagement. Secondly, please do continue to pray for our discernment on these opportunities. There are so many. A regular discussion between me and my staff is which ones can we go for? Which ones can we not go for right now? Because it wouldn't be fair. We don't have the capacity. And then lastly, resourcing this vision. Many of you have already given to our appeal, the Big Green Vision appeal. Thank you very, very much. This is really encouraging. But if you haven't yet and you want to, we'll make that easy and possible for you at the end. And maybe you've already given, but we would love to encourage more people to think about being a regular donor, a regular giver. Even if it's only £3 a month, it's regular, we can rely on it, and it really helps us to plan for the future. So before God, if it seems appropriate to you, please also consider supporting this work. But whatever you can do in your prayers and your actions, whether you can support it financially or not, we are grateful and we want to work with you and look forward to doing that. I'll end there.
Thank you, Andy. And we have some questions coming in. First of all, just to say, some of you have been having difficulty seeing the slides and also seeing Andy at the same time. If you go to your view option, top right hand, usually in Zoom, and try switching to side-by-side speaker view or gallery view, hopefully you might be able to see them a little better. But first of all, Andy, we've got a general question. Why are we called A Rocha?
Anybody out there speak Portuguese? The word is Portuguese. It comes from the original A Rocha organization that was set up in Portugal by an Anglican vicar and his wife, who were crazy bird watchers, Peter and Miranda Harris. I'm sure some of you actually know them or will know of them. And they named it, I believe, after a nearby cliff that was known in Portuguese as A Rocha, the rock. There you go. That's the origin. And we're now a little international network with 22 A Rochas around the world, but we've all stuck with the name.
Yeah, and I like to think of it about the wise man building his house on the rock and providing a firm foundation for Christians in conservation as well.
I think Peter and Miranda may have had some of that in mind, a deliberate double entendre.
I think so. Could you just explain how A Rocha UK partners with A Rocha International and perhaps also with the other A Rochas across the world?
Absolutely, and there are exciting things afoot. So we're a federation, really, of independent national organisations, and A Rocha International is the coordinating body for us. The exciting things afoot is we're just bringing in our very first joint strategy. So each organisation will continue to do what it feels led to do for its own country, but we're recognising that there are many things that if we could do them together, it would save resources. We would also have more impact. So literally last week, I believe, we've agreed the new first strategy. And as part of that, we'll be seeing much more collaboration between sister organizations, helping each other in areas where one of us has strength and others have less. For example, I said earlier, at least 6 other Rochas would like to do Eco-Church. Well, Eco-Church is an A Rocha UK program, but we're working as fast as we can to be able to give it away safely so others can run it in their own country, okay? We also want to up the income that we give to A Rocha International, which obviously, if they're going to play a coordinating role for us, they need to have the capacity to do that. So there is a new agreement that the member bodies will give a percentage of their income each year to A Rocha International, because they need to be properly funded to coordinate all of us. So that gives you a hope of flavour. A very new programme, also agreed only last year, that we're going to do together, is on climate change and nature, bringing those two issues together.
That's brilliant, Andy. I'm going to move us on because we need to keep to time. Thank you, everyone, for all your questions. There have been a number that have come in about churches, but we're going to be putting those in conjunction with Helen Stevens when we look at churches in particular. And apologies if we didn't get specifically to your question. So can I introduce you now to Helen Stevens, Church Relations Manager and Head of Eco Church, who's going to share some stories about the Eco Church programme. And following on from Helen will be Andy Lester, Head of Conservation as well. So over to you, Helen.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you, Mike. It's lovely to be with you this afternoon. I have the joyous task of sharing a couple of stories of our eco churches with you, although the hard part was choosing which ones from the thousands of stories of the amazing churches and people living out this quote from Reverend Canon Marion Russell: "The earth in all its beauty displays God's glory, and we are looking to cherish the earth, and that can mean hard work sometimes." On the next slide is St Mary's Church, Emsay with Eastby, a gold awarded listed building in the Diocese of Leeds. Let me begin with a brief insight into their story. They're what we might imagine as a fairly typical rural parish church, though I appreciate that every church and every context is unique. As has been said, all of the major church denominations have set targets to achieve net zero carbon by 2030 or a comparable date, and local churches across the country are doing the often hard work of reducing their carbon footprints. St Mary's has committed to be net zero carbon by 2025. As on the next slide, they're advertising their countdown to net zero to the wider community, and they're working in collaboration with other churches, leading a group called Towards Carbon Neutral Churches in Craven. They've been doing that since 2020. And whilst the carbon zero feasibility study that they commissioned looked into the use of heat pumps, after much research, they decided that wasn't the way forward for a small church with limited weekly use. They're focusing, though, on heating the people, not the space, as a way forward, even holding a pew heating day and surveying people about how hot or cold they felt, a bit cold, uncomfortably cold, or just right. It reminds me of a story about porridge. Over the last few years, they've involved the whole church in after-service discussions about their individual carbon footprints using the WWF footprint tool. And they've got an ongoing plan. They've implemented a lot of this already to reduce their church's carbon emissions by replacing their gas boiler with electric heating, using a green tariff, and learning from the Climate Stewards 360 carbon tool. They've been very thorough across the whole of the church building, from changing out lighting to exploring double glazing to insulation, draft proofing and transport options, and they're investigating solar panels for the south roof. On the next slide, the reason for me highlighting them today is that in their countdown to net zero, they're involving the whole church and working for the benefit of the wider community in what can sometimes be the unfamiliar language of carbon and targets reserved for the few. And whilst looking at their own carbon footprint, they keep in mind the why, regularly informing the congregation about environmental issues around the world, especially where others are experiencing climate change's impacts the most. So they're a campaigning church too. It's not net zero for the sake of a target or because they've been asked to meet it. It's net zero for the sake of our neighbours, local and global, human and the other than human world. It's our faith and our love of others that compels us. The holistic approach that they are taking toward carbon net zero is underpinned by everything else they do as a church, which is what it means to be an eco-church. Creation and environment are strongly embedded in their worship. Children from the village primary school have been taking part in Churches Count on Nature for the last few weeks in June. This year, they've been running a study group with the theme of living well, using poetry to explore how our living is enhanced by our relationship with God and creation. And this is open to the wider village community, and it's held in one of the village pubs. Sounds like my kind of church. They manage their churchyard organically, and they have a careful mowing regime to leave wildflowers and grasses uncut through spring and summer. And they're putting up hedgehogs slow warning signs at the vicarage and church, as they've seen hedgehogs, one of our target 25 species, in both locations. They're an ordinary church living out their faith in a very holistic way, and they are what it means to be an eco-church. The second church I'd like to highlight on the next slide is St. John's Methodist Church in Settle, which became a silver awarded church last year. They initially responded no to the eco-church survey land section, as 95% of their land was tarmacked, as you can see in the photo on the left. However, some of my wonderful colleagues pointed out some possibilities to them, and from there followed this inspiring transformation, some of which you can see on the right. They noted an amazing number of wildflowers around the building, which someone had been faithfully recording since the pandemic. So there was already an abundance of life on an unpromising site, and they thought how much more could be achieved if they gave God a helping hand. They recognised that their plot was south-facing and sunny, and they set out to create a space to encourage their local congregation and wider community to enjoy it. And within 6 months, they had planters, seating and tables made from donated wooden pallets. And the local Settle Primary School Green Team came to help with planting honeysuckle, clematis and winter jasmine, as well as the pupils at the school designing a decoration for the side of the shed. They write that as the plants began to grow, so did the interest, with the local playgroup visiting and a regular local dementia group planting sunflower seeds, watching them each week until they were ready to plant out. And they've even held some services in the garden. On the next slide, you can see that what was previously considered a dead space is one that has come alive, with the glass cross in the back of the church wall, a striking visual feature and focus for prayer. They have future plans, which includes creating a prayer maze. I don't know where they're going to fit that. And they've been invited to twin their garden with the primary school eco garden, which is still in its developmental phase. They say this project, more than any other, has galvanised their church community. Our future eco-church plans here at A Rocha as custodians of eco-church include doing all we can to see more churches registering and, more importantly, achieving awards. So such as our Gold Forum that we started this year, cascading support exactly in the way that St Mary's is doing. And our regular prayer forums provide an opportunity to join and pray with others from the wider eco-church community. And because of what you see here at this church in Settle, we're looking at ways to encourage even more churches to take care of the land, whether an acre or an overlooked derelict yard. And we're working more closely with our conservation team on this. And finally, in the final slide, before I hand it over to Andy Lester, our Head of Conservation, I finish with the rest of this quote from Reverend Canon Marion Russell, that the sometimes hard work is about us sharing our faith through what we do, where our beliefs inform how we behave towards this great and beautiful earth that God gave us to discover and to cherish. Thank you. Over to you, Andy.
Thanks, Helen. That was great. So my main message now is one of real hope. It's been an extraordinary year of inspiration across our reserves and our partners. And I wanted to start with this image, which is taken from Woolfields our little urban nature reserve, which A Rocha leases from the local council. And a few years ago, it was full, waist deep in rubbish. It was a drug dealing den that the Metropolitan Police had real struggles with. And over the last 8 years has been transformed into a multicultural wild space with sensory gardens and an orchard and a wildlife pond. And it's just a space for community to gather and of real beauty. We're grateful to Kylin, who was our original reserve warden for the original prayer walk and vision for the site, and walking that with me some years ago. And now it goes from strength to strength. But I wanted to share one little story from the place. And that was that a couple of years ago, as I was visiting the site and looking at the progress, in at the gate walked an Asian gentleman with gold chains around his neck and two minders either side of him. And I suddenly recognized him from the news as being a local heroin dealer. And it's not the sort of person you expect to meet on site, but he came straight up to me and he said, me and my boys have been watching what you, A Rocha, have been doing over the last few years. And he said, I've been doing bad things. And I just wanted to let you know we can't do bad things in the area anymore because we love what you're doing. And so we're moving elsewhere. But I just thought I'd come in and say we really like what you're doing. And me and my mates are very handy with a strimmer if you ever want a new volunteer. So, on one level, I declined the offer of the strimmer, but it was a reminder of this connection between society, nature restoration, and hope. Thanks. Next slide, please. And at the other end of the country, our other reserve, Foxearth Meadows, on the Suffolk-Essex border. And this picture, again, gave me huge hope. Here is Mark Preener, who is our outgoing reserves manager. He retires later this year, but over the last 7 years, he's been working incredibly hard in this extraordinary 12-acre site to help work to transform it for nature, for people, and for the kingdom. Now, in this picture, he's studying water levels. He's trying to understand where the water flow goes from and to, so he can better manage the water courses on the reserve. And he's done an incredible job. And the really exciting news that's come out of Foxearth over the last months is this little fact. For a 12-acre site, Foxearth is now recognised as the site with the most species of dragonflies and damselflies anywhere in the UK for the size of site. And it includes new arriving species like the willow emerald, a real testimony to the success of good science. Next slide, please. And if you do visit, whether you're looking at species like this, the emperor, or many of the other species, it's a reminder that when you create new habitat, when you understand the way it works, and when you try and work with the climate rather than against it, despite all the challenges that lie ahead, you can have moments like these of close encounters with wild nature, and it restores your soul. Thanks. Next slide, please. But it's also with our partners, and I want to share two short stories, and then I'll go to the slide that you see in the picture in front of you, because it's hot off the press from the Highlands of Scotland. And the first is this. Somebody asked me a question in a talk a few days ago. What has given you most hope this year? And the answer was this. I was visiting Black Nest Forest School, which is a project just on the edge of Windsor Great Park. It's one of our 49 partners, run by a most amazing lady with a passion for land, for community, particularly for young people. And we were out in her wildflower meadow, which we have been working with her to help restore through our Target 25 campaign, which is part of our Partners in Action program to restore species and habitats. And we estimated on that visit that there were 500,000 crickets and grasshoppers in the grass of that meadow. So loud were they and so visible that all I could do was lie in the grass and weep for joy. It was a reminder at a time when nature seems to be in free fall, that if you create it, they will come. There is great opportunity for nature to be restored despite the odds that sometimes seem absolutely stacked against them. So I just marveled at the small life in that one meadow. But here's the other thing that gives me hope. This is one of our newest partners in action. It joined the network just last week. It's our first landscape scale initiative. It's a place called Kilmallew on the north shore of Loch Linney in the West Highlands. It's a nearly 3,000-acre estate of absolute beauty. It's the place to see white-tailed eagles and otters, golden eagles and dippers, and an enormous range of rare and endangered butterflies. But it also needs work. The changes in climate are ravaging Western Scotland, causing trouble with the peat soils as they're washed into rivers. And so over the years ahead, we're going to be working with this project, like many others, at scale to try and transform the space to make it climate resilient and much more nature rich than it originally is now. So we have our work cut out, but we have an amazing network of partners to work with, as well as our own reserves to experiment on. A final slide, please, for me. So it's a season of new developments. We've just launched that new landscape scale partnership. And alongside the 49 partners that Andy Atkins mentioned we've got nearly 50 other projects and organisations waiting to join the network, who you will hear more about in the weeks and months ahead. And to help us with that work, we've created a network of conservation advisors who are going to be helping Regina, our Partners in Action manager, and myself in helping to keep relationship at the heart of our conservation work. It's by God's grace that it's happening, but also it's an enormous thank you to many of you, because without your support, the conservation work in A Rocha UK would simply be impossible. I shall hand back, and I believe it's an opportunity for questions.
Thank you, Andy. That's really good. And thank you, Helen, too, to just giving us some idea of the work we're doing with churches and in conservation across the nations here. Now, yeah, I do have some questions. And thank you, everyone, for the questions that you've brought in, that have come in. So just one for starters, Helen, what percentage of churches are signed up for EcoChurch now?
Okay, well, when we started in 2016, we set a goal to reach 10% of churches across England and Wales in 10 years, so by 2026. And we actually got there 3 years ago. I think we're now at about 14%.
That's brilliant to know. But if you're in a church and you want to join, we really want to bring that up. Andy, we've got a question about carbon offsetting, in fact, and relationship with individual trees. So to become net zero, this questioner asks, it would help to know how best we can score carbon offsetting. For example, how much carbon does planting one tree offset? Difficult to know when we achieve net zero, if not.
Very, very good question, and not the easiest question to answer.
Yeah.
I would just say that the challenge with carbon offsetting is sometimes, particularly when it comes to companies, it almost feels like it's designed to get you off the hook. And so I would simply say this, that the more trees you plant, the better. But in terms of determining how many trees does it take to offset your individual carbon emissions, that's very challenging to measure. In other words, you've got to first do an audit of all your activities, from your holidays to your driving to the food you eat, and that will give you an approximate value. But the tree value in terms of carbon depends, number one, on the age of the tree when you plant it. The older, the better, i.e. if you plant tiny trees, it'll take a long time for them to start offsetting carbon. It also depends on the soil types and how deep and how good your soil is, and therefore the best use of it. Is the best use of it planting trees on it, or is it restoring a wildflower meadow on top of it? So that's something we can help and advise, and it's something that we help and advise with the Partners in Action Network, but also through Eco Church. We've got the team of conservation advisors now who are helping support and encourage the network with that sort of advice. So no simple one-size-fits-all answer on that one, unfortunately.
Thank you, Andy. Yeah, and we do have another A Rocha organisation called Climate Stewards that is engaged in offsetting. But what I would say with that is that they are always looking for work that is conservation in itself and it's linked with development work. So it's practical good work in itself. Now, Helen, double question for you. So it's just be aware that we might not be able to get fully into this. So I'm going to see if I can paraphrase this a little bit. So on the eve of Earth Day this year, over 1,000 Christians and diverse denominations came together for No Faith in Fossil Fuel. That was attended by lots of Christian organisations, Operation Noah, Christian Aid, Tear Fund, and including us as well, A Rocha UK. This question is saying, our diocese, Southall and Nottingham, Chief Exec recently came to our deanery synod to explain the financial reasons why the diocese is not intending to divest from fossil fuels companies, even though the COV is now divesting, and yet we've given them a bronze award. Why would this be, do you think?
It's a very good question, very valid question. I think the first thing I'd say is that, you know, as an organisation, we also have no faith in fossil fuels. That's why we were at that march. And we want to see every sector of society getting off fossil fuels as fast as possible. The Eco-Diocese framework has been around for about 6 years. We've got just over half of the Church of England diocese now at bronze. And that framework of bronze is a kind of off the starting blocks, if you like. All of this is a work in progress. We have recently updated the criteria for silver eco-diocese, and we would expect to see significant progress around this and more active ethical divestment by the time that a diocese is reaching that. And just to put that in perspective, no diocese is at silver yet. So I hope that's enough of an answer on that one.
I hope so. It's about engagement and persuasion, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Have a look at what we're asking them to do at Silver Diocese. You might be surprised. A link question. How much does finance of churches and dioceses and their members' household finances contribute to the Eco Church assessment?
Yeah, another good question. It's all about finance, which is such a vital area. So there is a question in there about a church's finance, how a church is investing its finances. And then in the lifestyle section, that's where there are questions about a church encouraging the members of its congregation to make ethical investment choices. And if a church is using something like Climate Stewards 360 carbon footprint tool, that's a very comprehensive tool. There would be a lot in there leading towards more ethical choices actually across the board, not just in finance. So it's an important part of the survey.
Yeah, thanks.
Again, comes back to that encouragement, collaboration, like you said, Mike.
Thanks, Helen. And over to you again, Andy. You talked a bit about our partners in action. What does a landscape scale partnership mean? What does it involve?
So the first thing is this is a new venture for us, so it's quite exciting. So we're to an extent exploring as we go along. But by definition, we're looking at any project that is over 1,000 acres. So it's a relatively large and complicated site. This particular site is on a 90-year lease from the landowner to a Christian Outdoor Bounds organisation. And they are working collaboratively with us to look at what restoration looks like. So they will have their own remit in terms of running it as an outdoor bounds and retreat centre. But alongside that, practical conservation is at the heart of what they want to do. So elements to a landscape scale project are biodiversity recovery, extending habitats, and climate resilience. So those are the three elements that we are focused on that really underpin a large project. But I would add one thing, and that is right at the heart of it has to be the local community. So there is a very, very good tenant farmer who farms much of that land. And unless we can journey with him as part of it and really tap into his experience and knowledge, then we're on a hiding for nothing. You can't do large scale conservation projects, whether it's termed rewilding or whether it's termed a landscape scale project, unless you really engage well with local people. And so that is at the heart of the beginning of this new journey, is traveling well with local people.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andy. I've got one question for Helen. If I can keep it brief, because we've got another question that's coming in for Andy Atkins, which I think has sort of come up the level of questions. Just a quick one, Helen. What would be the one question you'd like to ask other Christians to enable them, to enable you help churches more effectively engage?
The one question I'd like to ask other Christians.
Yeah.
I guess it would be about what's stopping them, what's getting in the way, how can we help? But also, how can they help us? I'm not sure I've completely understood that.
Well, I think, yeah, I've come to that. I'm not sure I did. I often talk to people about actually it being a vocation for everyone, not just those who have this individual interest. We're all called to this by the Lord. Now, Andy Atkins. Oh, yes, there he is. We've got a question for you. Very quickly again, because we're a little bit tight on time. But does A Rocha get involved with lobbying government? And I suppose just I'd put in perhaps as well, I'm aware, of course, we had the State of Nature report recently as well, and perhaps talk about our involvement with that could be interesting.
I'm very impressed. You can answer the question. I was going to say exactly that. So yes, we do get involved in lobbying. Our capacity is small, and some of you may know my own background. I set up the lobbying department at Tear Fund. I then went on to lead Friends of the Earth. So I am very for using all of our democratic means to influence those in power, be they the government, be they business, be they indeed church leaders, going back to some earlier questions. So our capacity is small, so we tend to do it via coalitions that we're a part of. And an example, which Mike just referred to, is the Wildlife and Countryside Link Coalition. We're the only Christian member of that. Andy Lester, our conservation director here on the screen, is very involved in feeding in our comments, our solutions, our ideas, our proposals with them to government about environment policy and so on. And we've recently launched a joint campaign called Nature 2030, where our brand new policy and campaigns officer, our very first, as we try to increase our capacity in this area, Hannah Eves, will be leading the charge for us, liaising with Link, working with others on that campaign. So that it's a yes, we're small, but we're trying to do more.
That's brilliant, Andy. And yeah, certainly, I think one thing to realise is our scientific credibility is important to us alongside our Christian faith as well. And it's one of the things that actually we're recognised as a bona fide conservation organisation in that sense as well. I've got one quick further question for Andy Lester. Making the links between nature, net zero, social justice, etc. How are A Rocha and their partners using the donor economics or similar model of impact assessments?
It's a really good question. And I think all I would say is I want to use just one very brief example, which may or may not fully answer the question, but it is Monkstown, which is a community initiative in Northern Ireland. That is an initiative that works across the sectarian divides between Sinn Féin and the Ulster Unionists. And it is at one level, it is a space where people come together around nature conservation and restoration without politics. But at another level, it has an economic benefit as well, in that it is helping to fund local food growing for people who cannot afford it. It's helping to train people to grow their own food, and it's helping to bring new life into an area of real economic deprivation. Now, at one level, this is on a very, very small scale, and therefore, as I said, doesn't fully answer the question. But basically what it is saying, that all these threads are tied together. If you restore nature, you restore community cohesion, you will be able to bridge the gap on local economics and bring about economic restoration at the heart of urban and rural communities.
Thanks, Andy. That's really helpful. We're coming to a close. It has whizzed by so fast. Thank you, everyone who's been involved. Can I give a really big vote of thanks to all our techie people behind the scenes, because it's all gone pretty well seamlessly from that point of view. Thank you to the two Andys and to Helen as well for all their involvement. That gives you just a flavour of some of the things that we are involved with. And it's really, as I was saying at the beginning, as an exciting point for us. It's a calling that all of us feel involved with, engaging with, and we want to share that. We want to engage with other people too, and other organisations, be it your church, your charity, or you as an individual, because we believe that this is the way that actually hope can be given to the world at the moment. And actually, the human spirit really thrives and builds on hope as well. So thank you for joining with us today. You can follow this event, or if you want to go back, you can see it on our YouTube channel as well. And if you go to the various links you will find, you can sign up as well. One last thing to say, that as you'll be realizing, the charity sector for the last few months has been suffering somewhat since the pandemic, and we, like everyone else, have been finding the financial climate a little bit tough. We would really value it if you'd be interested to help us and support us in our work. You can see a QR code up there on the screen as well, which will take you to our giving page. One-off donations are fantastic. If you'd like to become a regular donor, if you want to be a partner with us in this work, we would really value that as well. And more than that, we would really value it if we can actually engage with you through our Wild Christian scheme, so that actually we can be part of that wider community, and also work with you, be it through a partner in action or through your church as well, through Eco Church. So I'm going to pray now, and then I'm going to give a calling for us to go out into this world and actually engage with caring for this wonderful creation God has given us. Let's pray. Lord, I pray that you would bless the work of all who care for the natural world, who care for it so that it can sing of your love to us. It can give praise to your name. Lord Jesus, I ask you to bless our work and the work of all other partner organisations that we engage with, so that together we may give hope to creation, hope to the wider world. So we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. You'll receive an email shortly after this seminar, which will give you the links and the recording of this session. And we will formally say goodbye now, but we will leave the last slide up for a couple of minutes before ending this as well, so that you can just take some details. But thank you so much for joining us, and may God bless you in all that you do in caring for the natural world and being a partner together in the mission of caring for God's creation. Goodbye.